Hey there, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and how long you've been with me. And if these stories help you sleep, don't forget to subscribe. It keeps the forest whispering. Story 2. My uncle has a strange set of rules. I moved in with my uncle who had a strange set of rules. When I was 12, I was forced to spend a summer with my great uncle Jeremy. You see, I was a bit of a troublemaker back in those days. My parents thought if I spent some time with my strict grouch of an uncle, I would somehow be rehabilitated. You can imagine how hard my eyes rolled when my mom and dad told me about their plan, but I was oblivious to the horrors I would endure that summer. Uncle Jeremy was somewhat of a mountain man. He lived in the remote wilderness of Montana's high pine forest. A homesteader through and through, he made a life where most people would go insane. Granted, Uncle Jeremy did seem a bit kooky to me at the time. My dad almost tossed me out of the car as we rolled into my uncle's mountain cabin. He didn't even wait for Uncle Jeremy to greet me at the door. I watched as Dad's little Prius made its way back down the long driveway and onto the unkempt dirt road. While I was a bit offended by how I'd just been abandoned, I was not envious of the long journey ahead of him. It took us almost 2 hours to traverse that nasty road. I was sure we'd be left stranded at one point or another. A Prius is no off-roading vehicle. The hybrid's tail lights disappeared amongst the dense forest. My attention turned to the rickety wooden cabin. This house was not what you would imagine it to be. It wasn't the picturesque idea people have when they think of a log cabin. I could see the structure had been through a lot. The logs were weathered, faded by the hot Montana summer and the icy winter winds. I could tell that everything used in its construction was sourced from the surrounding forest. Likewise, no modern amenities were visible, no power lines, fire hydrants, or even a satellite dish. I knew then it would be a duller summer than I'd imagined. I lifted a hand to knock on the old door and stopped when I noticed a few deep scratch marks on its facade. Bears, I thought to myself. An uneasy feeling that I was being watched from the pines came over me. I cocked my head in the direction of the tree line. It felt like something was calling me over to the woods. The door squealed open and I returned my gaze to the cabin. In the passageway stood a gray-bearded man, the fibers in his beard long, greasy, and matted. His skin was old and weathered. I suspected the same reasoning as the cabin's. He looked at me through the gray film in his eyes. I'd never actually met Uncle Jeremy up until that point, but I'd heard stories about him from my father. My father had suffered the same fate as me the summer between 7th and 8th grade. He told me Uncle Jeremy was not a man to be trifled with. You listen to everything your Uncle Jeremy tells you. He is not a man you want to make angry. My father would lecture, but when I looked into the face of the withering man, I didn't sense an ounce of animosity. He almost seemed kind. Nothing resembled the ferocity my father had mentioned. "Hi, I'm Marcus." I outstretched my hand in the introduction, but he slapped it away before placing a hand over my mouth. "Shoo, we don't say names here." He moved my head over to the side to make sure no one, or nothing, was listening. More of my father's description of my great-uncle came to mind. "Uncle Jeremy is a bit strange, but he has your best interest in mind. Try your best to ignore his lack of civility." His words were all starting to make sense now. Uncle Jeremy ushered me into the cabin and I thought I heard him whisper my name as he pushed me inside. That is until I turned to see the look of fear in his eyes. I knew then that the sound had drifted in on the early summer breeze, somewhere beyond the tree line. The hairs on the back of my neck stood. "Is everything okay, Uncle Jeremy?" His open palm slapped my cheek as I spoke his name. "Damn it, kid. I told you no names," he said through gritted teeth before returning his gaze to the tree line. Almost like a dream, a faint voice slithered into the cabin. "Jeremy," the voice called. "What the hell is that?" I asked but received no reply. Uncle Jeremy quickly slammed the door shut. Rule number 1, no names. I dropped my gaze at his reprimand. Rule number 2, if you hear something strange, leave it be. Ignore it. You hear me? I ponder his instructions before moving to question his logic. WI. Not another word on the matter. Those are the rules. My only rules, you follow them or I'll send you back to your little life in Boise, you hear me? Just then my escape from homestead living became clear. Break a few rules here and there and I'd be back in the gem state. I tried not to smile at the plot that was formulating in my mind. Your room is down yonder. The old man pointed down a small hallway before leading me to it himself. We stepped into a small 10 by 10 room. I threw my backpack onto the bed and plopped down right beside it, giving a grunt of relief. What do you think you're doing, kid? This isn't some luxurious mountain retreat. I eyed the crumbling wooden walls, the understatement of the century, I thought to myself. We have work to do. He moved to the window and pushed open the shutters, taking in a lungful of pristine mountain air in the process. Beyond his gaze stood a 2-acre clearing in the forest. A mix of fields, more comparable to glorified gardens, and livestock, chickens, goats, and one cow. He turned to me and noted my disappointed face. What do you think, this was a free ride? No, we work for our food here, he said with the first ounce of enjoyment I'd seen inch across his face. He pulled open a drawer on the nightstand. I placed these here for you before you got here. I peered into the drawer to find some old torn overalls. You put those on and meet me outside. There's a lot to get done around here. The faster we get it over with, the faster we can have ourselves a nice supper. Later that night I lay in bed unable to sleep. All of my muscles were aching. Uncle Jeremy was not lying. Homestead living is not for the weak. We'd worked until the sun met the horizon, and this time of year in Montana, that was around 9:30 p.m. We'd weeded the fields, fed the chickens, and milked the dairy cow whose name I found out to be Bessie, and done dozens upon dozens of other tasks that were not very enjoyable. The best thing about it was that Uncle Jeremy said we would do it all again the next day. I placed the pillow over my face, hoping that it would suffocate me. I was a beat dog that needed to be put out of its misery. The warmth of the plush fabric seemed to comfort me a bit, so I left it there as the night slowly started to wash over me. Just as I was about to fall into an uneasy night of sleep, I heard scratching from the other side of the wall. It was coming from outside. The sound was very faint. It almost reminded me of the time we had mice inside the walls back home, only these walls were not hollow, they were solid lumber. I moved the pillow off to the side, making sure that nothing needed the scraping by my head. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The noise sounded rhythmic, as if someone was sending a message. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Whatever it was clawing deeper into the side of the cabin. The noisemaker was making the noise was too strong to be a mouse, a raccoon maybe. Then the sound intensified to a loud ear-piercing screech, like someone clawing at an old chalkboard. Screech, screech, screech. I shot to a seated position. It must have been a bear. Montana grizzlies scared the shit out of me, part of the reason why I'd never come to meet Uncle Jeremy in the first place. I heard the same faint whisper that had come from the tree line earlier that day, only this time instead of Uncle Jeremy's name, my name hissed through the cracks of the cabin. Merkerkus. I looked at the shutters on the window, and my heart dropped when I saw something slowly pulling them open. Uncle Jeremy. I shouted. From down the hall, I heard a bedroom door smash open, followed by my room's door. Uncle Jeremy stood there holding his .22 in hand, his eyes meeting mine, before noticing the slowly creeping shutters. He leaned the gun on the wooden wall before running over to the shutters and forcing them closed. He quickly locked the latch before turning to me. Kid, I had 2 rules and you broke both of them the first night. He shouted at me while I made sense of what just happened. I was hoping that the more my uncle talked, the more the situation would clear up, but everything he said just made me more confused and frankly, terrified. Now you've done it, kid. It now knows our names, it's imprinted on us. You have no idea how hard it was to get rid of the last one. The last one. I thought. What are you talking about? I quivered. Never mind that. From now on you keep these shutters locked here. He didn't have to tell me twice. The whole house is going to be locked down. And just so we're clear, if you hear me calling your name, it ain't me. What the hell, what else could it be? I thought before I opened my mouth to ask a clarifying question. What is it? I said. What's my second rule? My uncle commanded. I pondered for a bit before responding. If I see something, leave it be. That's right. Leave it be. No more of this. We will not talk about it anymore. It will only encourage it. Suddenly, I no longer wanted to go through with my plot to get Uncle Jeremy to send me home. The next morning after breakfast, Uncle Jeremy and I stepped outside to inspect the side of the wall where the noise was coming from. Uncle Jeremy touted a gun belt today, a magnum revolver in its sheath. When we gazed at the marks on the wall, I was sure that no grizzly had created the noise. These scratches were not random like the ones on the door. No, these markings were indeed a message. Drawn on the wooden logs was a cryptic symbol, a circle with 3 jagged lines drawn through it. On top of this circle were 2 names, Jeremy and Marcus. I gulped as Uncle Jeremy got a closer look. He gave a nervous chuckle. He'll be back tonight, he said in a tone that desiring itself to be false. My stomach fluttered in fear. Bessie, the dairy cow, gave an agonizing moo. I could tell that something was bothering her. Uncle Jeremy turned with a sad look on his face. He took to his feet and walked his way over to the cow. When he was feet away from her, he took to one knee. It's already begun. I looked over his shoulder and my mouth dropped when I saw the sight of gore that still torments me to this day. Bessie's udders were mutilated, flesh hanging off of each of the protrusions, and flies feasting on her fresh wounds as blood mixed with milk. Poor Bessie, Uncle Jeremy said. I could tell that seeing his cow suffer made him emotional. I moved to comfort him, but before my hand could grace his shoulder, he stood. He unholstered the magnum and pointed it at Bessie's head. One shot rang out as every bird in the vicinity took flight. Bessie was dead. She now lay in a pool of blood and brain matter. Uncle Jeremy wiped away some tears before turning around and walking briskly back to the cabin. Come on, kid, we have to get ready. I knew that we were heading for some kind of battle. When the night fell on the cabin that day, Uncle Jeremy and I did not talk. We had barricaded ourselves and all of the livestock inside the little cabin. A total of 22 chickens, 7 goats, and a variety of domesticated geese. He'd thrust a rifle in my hand and give me instructions on how to shoot, though he said not to use it unless something happened to him. For the most part, the night was quiet. The chickens and geese had roosted for the night, and the goats had lost the excitement of being in a new environment. They now huddled together in a corner of the living room. I would almost say it was peaceful, until every animal began screeching at the top of their lungs. The birds flocked around the house. The goats erupted in a panic, running around trying to find any hiding place they could. Most now cowered under the dining room table. Almost as quickly as the commotion began, it all quieted down. I looked at Uncle Jeremy in bewilderment, but the look in his eye told me he'd seen all of this before. His eyes trained on the door. A familiar sound slid across the other side. It was the scratching that we'd heard the night before. In the same fashion, the scratching intensified before it erupted into a frenzy of banging. I eyed the door as the latch struggled to keep whatever was on the other side out. A voice soon followed suit. Jeremy, Jeremy, Jeremy. Oh, Uncle Jeremy. It sounded like me. For some reason, whatever was on the other side was using my voice as bait. The voice changed to that of Uncle Jeremy's. "Marcus. Open the door, Marcus." Uncle Jeremy looked at me before raising his revolver to the door. One shot rang out and the sound of something hitting the floor was evident from our vantage point. My uncle took to his feet and made his way over to the door, revolver at the ready. I wanted to tell him to stay put but couldn't find the courage. He opened the top latch, followed by the bottom. The door cautiously creaked open and Uncle Jeremy peered out of the small crack. I will remember the words that came from his mouth for the rest of my life. "Oh, shit." Suddenly a clawed hand reached through the small crack in the door and pulled him from the comforts of the cabin. I heard screams but wasn't sure if they belonged to Uncle Jeremy or the thing impersonating him. Everything went quiet and I wrestled with the idea of seeing what the outcome of the skirmish was. Just then I heard a voice that brought me a mountain of relief. "It's okay, kid. I got him." I heard Uncle Jeremy grunt as he seemingly took to his feet from the other side of the door. But as the door slowly swung open, my heart dropped. It wasn't my uncle. It was the creature that had taken him. Its body was tall and skinny, its skin pale, and its face, well, it had no face, just a plain identity. But as it stood there and turned in my direction, a mouth began to part. Skin sticking to its upper and lower jaws like large wads of gum, until they eventually gave way to sharp teeth. It spoke one more time in my uncle's voice. "Marcus." It took to a sprint, and when it was just feet from me, a revolver round spat out. The creature flopped to the floor in a green pool of blood. Standing at the door was my injured Uncle Jeremy. After that night, I had no problems following any of Uncle Jeremy's rules, no matter how arbitrary they were. We worked his homestead all summer, and I never mentioned his name again. I was never one for the rules, but in this instance, I was not going to summon another creature. Although I would see things dart beyond the tree line, I never mentioned them. At the end of the summer, I was adamant that I would never spend another day with my Uncle Jeremy, a model citizen through and through. 10 years later, I received word that my great-uncle Jeremy had passed. At first, I suspected old age. He was ancient after all, but my father informed me that it had been a bear attack that ended his life. He was a hard son of a bitch, and a hard son of a bitch deserved to go out like a man, I thought to myself. But then I started to question if a bear was really the culprit. My thoughts turned to the creature that once called from the other side of the cabin walls. I thought of its blank face and its jagged claws. The day before I was set to leave for his funeral, I received a letter in the mail. The address it was sent from was Uncle Jeremy's P.O. box. I'd assumed he'd left something in his will for me, but as I unsealed the letter, I found a single piece of paper. Written in blood was the same circle Uncle Jeremy and I had found carved on the other side of the cabin walls, the lines drawn across it just as jagged. I looked to the top of the circle, the same two names were written out. Only this time, one was crossed out, Uncle Jeremy's. At that second I heard faint scratching from the other side of my house in Idaho. I don't know how, but one of them found me. Story when it rains in the woods. It's raining again. To be honest with you, I'm terrified of rain. I never leave the house when it's storming outside. But to give myself some credit, I never used to be like this. I used to love watching the rain fall from outside the windows, but now I always have my curtains pulled tight across the edges of the windowsill. I wish I could show you what made me the way I am, partly to warn you, partly to verify myself. But I can't. I can only write out my story like it's some sort of fantasy. As if it's just another bizarre story on the internet that deserves to be forgotten in a week. If you see it like that, then that's fine, but I won't forget. I'll never forget. In 2012, I was a 21-year-old college student. I was absolutely madly in love with nature and all things wild. I had spent my childhood roaming up and down tree lines fantasizing about mythical creatures and fantastic monsters. Now there I was in 2012 as an adult, studying forestry with dreams of defending those tree lines and fantasies I held so dear. I was absolutely ecstatic when my professor announced an opportunity for some extra credit. He suggested that we spend a few days of our upcoming break walking along some trails and paths to remind ourselves why we were doing what we were doing. As an avid hiker, I knew of a hiking trail a few hours over from our town that offered plenty of room to walk with very little crowding. The only ones who really walked more than a few minutes down the trail were the park rangers, and the chances of seeing one of them on the ever-winding and expanding trails of a forest seemed small. "Hey Lily, want to take a trip down to the preserve with me?" I asked as the bell finished tolling, signaling the end of the school day. The girl next to me, Lily, was a quiet and sweet girl. She had long brunette hair that stretched just past her shoulders and gentle green eyes. She was the type of person who people admired from afar. Beautiful but silent. A passing joke or compliment would make her smile, but she'd very rarely comment back. To most, that'd make them move on to the next person. To me, that made me want to be closer to her. We'd been friends for a while at this point. Whether or not any sort of romantic intent was had between us, I couldn't say. We just knew we connected on some sort of level. "Yeah, of course. Just tell me when." She looked into my eyes with a soft smile on her face. I smiled back at her. I hoped this trip would turn out well. A few days passed. Lily and I spent our free time in stores gathering food, supplies, and tents together. Soon enough, we were all packed up and ready to head out. We took my small car with our bags tied down on the roof and took the highway a few hours east. By the time we got there, it was mid-afternoon. Still plenty of time to walk, but also a bad time to find parking. There was plenty of people here walking their dogs, setting up lunches and walking the paths. "I thought you said it'd be quiet," Lily asked with a slight snicker. I rolled my eyes in response. "I'm sure these kids aren't planning on hiking a few days in. It'll get quiet, I promise." I spun around and began taking our large packs off of the roof of the vehicle. For as big as they were surprisingly easy to carry. Lily slipped the straps over her shoulders and waited for me to start heading towards the park. As we approached the trail's entrance, we saw a ranger loosely standing guard. "You guys heading in?" he asked. There was no hostility or caution in his tone. He was just merely asking a simple question. "Yeah, that's all right, right?" I questioned the fit middle-aged man. "Of course, just let me know your names and take my card. If you need anything, call down to the station. There's a couple ranger shacks deeper in. Feel free to use them if you need to, just make sure to clean up." The ranger gave a welcoming smile and handed me a small business card for the local ranger station. "Thank you." "Oh, and my name's Max. This is Lily." Lily gave a small nod at the ranger, and he nodded back respectfully. "Well, Max and Lily, you enjoy yourselves out there. We'll be patrolling around, so if you see us, don't be scared to say hi." With those words, the ranger backed away from the entrance, and we began our trek. We spent half of the first day slowly walking in quiet appreciation. There's something so liberating about walking with no time limit. It's like all of the world's stress slides right off your back, and the only thing you have to worry about is yourself. In that exact moment, you're all that matters. No bills, no studies, no cares. Just avoid snakes and strange plants and you're all set. It wasn't long into our journey before the sun began to nestle itself behind the trees, and the warm, but steadily dropping, temperature of the late afternoon's winds began sweeping under our sweaty clothes. "Let's find a clearing to settle into," Lily said, her head tilting from one direction to the other, looking for a place to set up. I nodded in approval and saw a small opening further down the path, clearly made by others who took a similar trip. It only took a few minutes to set up our tents in the clearing and to start a small fire. After all that walking and hard work, we were finally ready to be off our feet for a while. Lily plopped herself down on the opposite side of the fire I was sitting at and pulled out a granola bar to eat. I felt a rumble in my stomach and pulled out one of my own. "This place is really beautiful," she said, taking a large bite out of the bar. "Yeah, haven't seen many animals yet though." I unwrapped my food and placed it on my lips, ready to take a bite. I quickly glanced over at Lily and froze. In the increasingly darkening forest just off the trail, just behind Lily, was something about the size of half a football. It was cloaked in the darkness, but I assumed it had to have been some sort of small critter. I began to squint my eyes, trying to focus on it, but whatever it was seemed to fade out of existence, going straight into the ground. "Everything all right?" Lily asked. I realized it must have seemed like I was staring at her with food half in my mouth. I laughed and shrugged, shaking my head softly. "Yeah, sorry, I thought I saw an animal or something off in the woods. It was small, could have just been a rabbit or something. It must have burrowed into the ground though." My friend peered over her shoulder into the silent woods and looked around. I knew she wouldn't see anything, whatever it was left, as quickly as I caught sight of it. We ended up finishing our meal, extinguishing the fire and climbing into our separate tents. I slept like a log. All of that walking put me out like a light. It wasn't until the morning that I woke up. I stumbled out of the tent, nearly tripping on a small fabric ledge at the exit of my portable shelter. The hot and humid summer's morning sun hit me like a pile of bricks. "Just so you know, I think we need to watch out for snakes," Lily said softly while I was wiping my brow. I looked over at her to see her undoing the tent supports from the forest floor. "Did you see one?" I asked, bending down and following suit with the camp cleanup. "I think so. I heard something rubbing on the bottom of my tent last night." I opened my eyes, and the indents on my walls looked like a pretty thick snake trying to wiggle its way in. She didn't seem bothered by the potential late-night visitor, so I kept her warning in my mind but continued on. As our journey went on, we realized that every step we took there was another blotch in the sky. Somehow a storm was brewing overhead that none of the forecasts we had watched warned us of. "How much longer until it rains?" Lily was interrupted by a large thunderclap nearby in the clouds. I felt the earth tremor below us before a few raindrops began falling from the dimly lit sky. "Thanks, Lily," I said, arching my head towards her direction. She scoffed and I laughed. The rain was little more than a small drizzle at that moment, but it was clear it was going to get worse. "Let's hurry and find a place to set up." I watched as she began to increase her pace, slowly moving from a walk into a jog, heading deeper down the trail. I followed suit right next to her. For a while it seemed like we weren't going to find a clearing anytime soon. We were already on the verge of being considered undoubtedly drenched, and to our luck, at that exact moment of thought, another strong explosion of thunder erupted from above. This time the floodgates were opened. Rain began to fall with a purpose and with enough force to erupt on impact, splashing everything nearby with the drop's watery contents. "Hey, right over there," I heard Lily yell out, just barely audible through the thunderous rain. She was running off of the main path down a small side trail nearby. I looked at where she was heading and saw a small cabin. I ran off the path with her. With each step more and more mud thrust itself against my legs. I increased my speed, hoping to catch up to my light-footed friend, but something caught me off guard. The tip of my foot slid underneath something and my momentum carried me downwards, face first into a mud bath. For a few seconds I was dazed, just laying down in the running muck pit. I eventually looked down to my feet and saw what looked like a thin tree root also caked in dirt erupting out of the ground. But as my eyes kept on the root, those initial assumptions fell to the wayside. The shimmering of the mud is what made me realize that whatever this object was, it was moving just beneath the mud. Then it clicked in my head. The snakes Lily had brought up, I had just tripped over one of them. I felt a shiver cross over my back and I jolted back up to my feet and continued on my path, abandoning that snake behind. Without another incident, I made it to the cabin doors and busted inside, finally free from the hurricane-like storm. "Wow." A familiar voice rang out in the shack. I looked over to see a drenched but otherwise clean Lily staring at me with an amused smile on her face. Decide to have a wrestling match out there. Huh, funny, I said, looking down at myself. Mud was dripping off of just about every pore of my body. I think I met one of your snakes you mentioned out there. It decided to give me a little trip. Oh really? Lily said as she grabbed me and turned me around, searching the back of my back for something to help me clean up. You were right, they're pretty thick. I wonder what kind they are. I can't imagine them being venomous being that wide. I felt the hands of my companion yanking out fabric from my pack. I took some time to look around the cabin as Lily pulled the towels free. It was wooden, old, and completely empty. There was a cooking stove off to one side, but other than that it looked very sparse. Clearly it was only meant for a quick one-night stay. Here, get yourself cleaned up. I turned back around and Lily handed me a bundle of towels. I immediately wiped off my face and brow. The dirt was already starting to dry and stick to my skin. Thanks, I replied to her as she began setting up her things. I put my pack down against the door and walked over to a window, still wiping myself down. I watched as the rain continued its assault on the earth, the dirt running like rivers down the valleys and trails, both natural and man-made. It looks terrible outside, I remarked. I heard a small groan of acknowledgement come from behind me. I let my eyes trail over the forested wetland over to the path we took to get up here. My body locked up when I saw something right where I tripped. Something was protruding from the ground like a small pillar. I rubbed the inside of the window fruitlessly to clear off the fog and obstructing rain. I could barely make out what looked like a thick, partially submerged branch broken off on one end with small twigs splintering off skyward. Hey, come and look at this. I called out to Lily, who was still fondling around with her bags. Is it the snake? She asked, rising to her feet. I don't think so. It looks weird though. I watched the mud-coated object get hammered by rain as Lily approached and peered outside. Is that a broken tree root? She suggested. I could only shrug. Whatever it was wasn't moving. Wait dash, Lily chimed in again, look at the color. As more and more of the rain ran its way down the object, the less obstructed by mud the object became. I narrowed my eyes, pushing past the raindrops on the window, and noticed exactly what Lily was talking about. Whatever was under that mud was a pale shade of gray. Oh my God. Lily gasped and grabbed her mouth. What is it? I turned and looked at her, my eyebrow upturned in confusion. Look at the end of it, she said, holding her breath. I turned my gaze back outward and focused in. I felt my heart drop. Fingertips. It was an arm reaching out of the ground, still as the grave. Oh my God, my voice wavered slightly. We should call the rangers and get them out here. Where's their card? She asked, hand extended towards me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wet but legible business card. Without hesitation, Lily snatched it out of my hand and began dialing the number in. Hello, I'd like to report something on one of the trails. She paced back and forth on the squeaky cabin floors. I turned and kept my gaze on the hand. It looked petrified in place, fingers eagerly reaching towards the sky, letting the water rush over it. We're at dash, she began to stutter. We're at, I heard the voice on the other side of the phone chirp up and Lily nodded. Hey Max, can you take a step outside and tell me what number is next to the door? I peeled my eyes away from the hand. I felt an increasingly oppressive air pressing its way inside the cabin. I shook my intuition away and walked to the door. I opened it up and stepped outside. I peered towards the arm and could see it more clearly without the blurry window between us. It was hairless, smooth, and the fingernails seemed clean and trimmed. The water that gushed over it almost seemed to vanish on impact, as if it was some sort of sponge. I had to force my eyes away from it to view the number on the wall. 17. I took a deep breath, repeating the number in my head before the sound of a loud clap echoed off behind me. I jumped slightly on edge. I turned back towards the direction of the arm and saw nothing in its place. Just the mud quickly running down the trail. I swallowed hard and rushed back inside. The number is 17, but I think the arm fell back into the mud. It's not there anymore. Lily's eyes went wide as she relayed that information over to the dispatcher. It wasn't long until she pulled the phone away from her ear and hung up. They told us to stay put and that this storm's not going to pass anytime soon. They said they've got a ranger on the way and the police have been informed, but it might take them a while to reach us out here. I bit my lip and looked back outside towards the empty path. I hope it didn't get dragged away by the current. I mumbled. Lily came up right beside me, joining me at the window. I'm sure they'll be able to follow that mud slick down to wherever it goes. On the bright side, that rain cleaned you up a bit. She gave a reassuring smile and I looked down at myself. My clothes were still riddled with mud, but the rain on my skin seemed to have washed away most of the dirt. I guess that's always a plus. I said stoically, "Come on, Max, let's make ourselves at home at least. I'll just lock the door in case, well, you know." Her voice trailed off. "In case there's a killer out there." I mumbled at her as she walked over to the door and flipped the lock. She turned around and averted her eyes from my gaze, choosing instead to continue her mission of getting set up. After a few minutes of silence, we had our food laid out in front of us. We had agreed that once the ranger gets here, our little expedition was over. We had seen more than enough in just the past 2 days than we could have in a lifetime. "Let's eat and try to get some sleep," I said, chowing down on some extra rations. Lily nodded and joined in on the feast. With full stomachs, we set up for bed. I noticed my friend kept looking out towards the darkened windows. I could feel tension in the air. "Everything all right?" I asked. Lily shook her head dismissively. "I just feel weird, like I'm being watched." "I'm sure it's nothing, but just to be safe, Dash." She ripped off her pillowcase then mine before walking over to the windows and draping them over the glass as makeshift curtains. "I just don't want anything looking in at us while we sleep." "I don't blame you." I made my way to my bedroll and caseless pillow before lying down, trying to get comfortable. Lily did the same. It was a few hours into the night before I heard Lily's hushed voice. Max, wake up, do you hear that?" I opened my eyes less groggy than I expected and met Lily's gaze. She was staring at the wooden door of the cabin. I spent a few seconds watching the door before I lightly saw the handle of the door jiggle. Someone was trying to get in. "What do we do?" Lily asked. I was speechless. Maybe it's the Dash. Our whispered conversation was interrupted by a loud knocking coming from the other side of the wooden door. Bang. 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 I jumped to my feet. It's got to be the cops. I began my slow, meticulous walk to the door. "Who's out there?" Silence. "Hello." I yelled again. Abruptly, the banging started again, loud enough to drown out my voice. I took a step back from the door and kneeled close to the ground. Each impact on the door rocked the wooden frames of the small cabin. I watched as one of the pillowcase curtains began to slowly slip off the window. "No," Lily whispered, tears in her eyes. I rushed over to the window just as the fabric fell and was met face to face with the darkness outside. The banging on the door stopped suddenly. I very carefully kneeled down and grabbed the fabric in my hands to toss back over the window. Thud. Appearing out of the darkness was the palm of a hand. It slapped the window with a heavy force. I could only see the pale palm in the shroud of blackness outside. I quickly threw the pillowcase back on the window and backed up to Lily. She was shivering, her eyes wide with fear. That was the hand, Max. That was the hand that was outside earlier. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I wrapped my arms around Lily for as much my comfort as hers. Thud, 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 thud. The wet palm of the hand kept slapping against the glass. I could hear ripples of cracks spreading along the window pane. I squeezed onto Lily as she balled up and kept my eyes focused on the pillowcase covering the glass, hoping it wouldn't fall and expose that lifeless arm again. With one last thud, it stopped. A light shone through the fabric of the window mere seconds after the attack halted. I could hear the struggling sounds of wheels rolling up towards the cabin. I let out a sigh and a prayer that the Rangers had finally made it. With the sounds of the wheels stopping just a few yards away, I finally heard a voice call out from the void outside. "Lily. Max. You in there?" The voice sounded familiar. It was the Ranger from the day prior. I slid to my feet, dragging Lily with me. "Yeah, we're inside, but someone's out there," I yelled. I rushed over to the door and opened it to see the Ranger standing stiff off in the middle of the small opening in front of the cabin. He was facing us, but the light from his rover coupled with his hat covered his body in intense shadows. His body seemed rigid. "Come out of that box and we'll get you home," the Ranger said. His voice seemed different this time, disjointed from his body. I stayed quiet. Something was very wrong here. "Step out of there. Now." The voice grumbled, unrecognizable from earlier. "Are you all right?" I called out a little more than a whisper. "Of course I am. Can't you see my smile?" The Ranger tilted his neck backwards. His hat slipped from his skull, which allowed the light from behind him to illuminate his face. His eyes were wide and full of both pain and fear. His lips were quivering in shock. I backed up more into the doorway and watched as two impossibly long fingers trailed their way from behind the Ranger's head and made their way across his cheeks to his mouth. They slid inside with little resistance and began pulling his lips outward in a mockingly gruesome smile. Then they kept prying. I watched as his lips strained with the force of the fingers inside of his mouth. His lips became white with the stress placed against them before a shower of red erupted from his mouth, parting the centers of his lips like sliced meat. "I'm so perfectly happy," a voice called out from just behind the Ranger, its voice thick and unnatural. I looked for the source and froze. There, right next to the Ranger's feet, was a half-submerged human face dug deeply into the mud. Its black, cold eyes shone from some unknown source. Whatever this was a monster of the strictest definition. Its gaze was so vastly separated from humanity that there was no common ground between us. As I locked eyes with this thing, human in shape and deviled in eyes, I saw the Ranger fall into the mud. Just behind his head was a long spider-like arm stretching out of the ground, seemingly changing its size and shape as if it only faintly followed the laws of this reality. The Ranger's body twitched and spasmed on the ground as more and more lifeless hands began to slither out from the mud, wrapping their hands around his body. I was so thirsty, but now I'm so very hungry. The submerged head called out unblinkingly towards me. Without another warning, the Ranger's body was ripped under the earth and devoured by the mud. The ground where he was shifted and bubbled over like a small eruption. The creature's eyes stared at me with a deadening gaze. It was observing me. I let out a small chirp from my mouth. Without changing expression, the head effortlessly started gliding through the earth towards the cabin, fingers and arms popping out from the earth around it like fins from a shark. I had stored enough courage to slam the door shut and lock it before running back over to Lily, who saw the whole thing. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head and slumped down next to her. "I don't know." We sat in silence until the sounds of scratching came from below the floorboards. Hundreds of fingers tearing away flesh to the bone, trying to burrow their way upwards. All we could do was sit in the corner furthest away from the windows and pray they didn't get to us. That night we watched as the floors pulsated upwards and downwards as the foundation began to crumble. Those bombs were going to drag us and our wooden coffin downwards into the earth. I didn't know what to do. I sat there as the floor cracked open and mud crept up through the seams of the boards like blood flowing from a vein. I sat waiting to die, but Lily had other plans. She grabbed my hand and yanked me at my feet. She stared at the door for a split second before sprinting off with me in tow. She bursted open the door and ran towards the ranger's vehicle. Luckily for us, the ranger never shut it off before the earth took him down. We both hopped on its seat and zipped off the path back from where we came. I hazarded a glance back towards the cabin to see it crumbling into the ground, but there was something else there. Still half submerged on the path mere yards away from us was that unblinking head. Its black eyes shone dead set and emotionless on our escape. We kept driving and driving for God knows how long, until we hit some other rangers who were on a scouting mission up to us and their missing comrade. We told them everything we could, but the looks of disbelief said enough to us. We were labeled as emotionally distressed and unreliable witnesses. The powers that be listed the disappearance of the ranger and the cabin as accidental by case of mudslide. Now every time it rains, I wonder if somewhere out in the woods a single head peers out on the trails waiting for someone to pass by, a million hands waiting just below the surface to drag them down into the earth. Thank you for listening to Night Whispers. If the shadows kept you company tonight, leave a comment. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. And if you're brave enough, like, subscribe, and come back next time. Just don't follow the voice in the trees.